So, welcome to our third and final Council on the Road for 2018. Thanks for coming in. And as for those of you who don't know what kind of format we do, it's simply that, a listening session. What we do is we take as many questions as you have, for as long as you have, and to the extent we can answer them, we will. If we can't answer them, we have them as homework assignments, and then we try to follow up with people either directly or try to address them by looking into it. That may require some time. So the way that this works is, like I said, anybody has a question, raise your hand, start talking, and or issue, discussion, and if there are people in the audience that have an answer, a response, thoughts that want to build upon it, happy to hear it. So whoever wants to start. Oh, wait, oh, sorry. I thought everybody knows. I'm sorry. I apologize. I know, sorry. I'm sorry. To my right is Beth Little. She is Councilwoman at large, so she represents the entire city of Summit, and she was elected this past year in 2017. To my left is Marjorie Fox. She is Councilwoman for Ward 2. So for those of you who don't know or not quite sure what your ward is, if you imagine Springfield and then Broad Street as the dividing line, everything, the other side in the towels, everything that's towards the first aid squad. And
the north side is Ward 1.
Which is what I represent. And so you have at-large Ward 1, Ward 2. You've got the entire city covered.
And the mayor will be coming. She has office hours till 7:30, so she'll be here.
And vote? Okay, with that, who wants to start? Yes, please. And just one thing, just identify yourself and who you are, and if you have a street or something that you want to just tell us.
My name is Valerie Bamby. I live on Morris Avenue. And I was pleased to hear you say that you were going to try to address the signage with the county not to make the left-hand turn onto Morris Avenue from the Kent Place to Forest. What I'd like to see on the opposite side of Kent Place, when one is turning left onto Morris Avenue, is some sort of a delayed traffic light. Because for some reason, the traffic that comes from the CVS to Forest side of Kent Place towards Morris Avenue, the high school area, that can back up a great deal. So you're lucky if you can get one or maybe two cars to make a left at that light.
But can you just clarify, so if you're going towards town, the
so
left
if I was departing the high school here and I was heading towards Morris Avenue, to make the left onto Morris Avenue, sometimes you can just sit there.
Yes, I
got it. Yes, understood. Yes, because the traffic is constantly coming from that side. You're waiting to make that left, and you can't make that left.
And it does back up.
Okay,
right.
Got it.
I think a delayed light would be really helpful there.
Okay.
That's one that I think we would have to go to the county for, since it's a county road. But
since we're asking,
But I think we've all seen the need for better signage to delineate the no left turn, because I live right near Lincoln Hubbard School, so I come there all the time, and I see people making the illegal lefts all the time.
They've been doing that since before the bridge was out.
So I think we need better signage and maybe the left signal, left turn signal at those lights for people. So I think that's
thank you for raising that.
Definitely valid.
Yeah. Leslie.
Hi, Leslie. I live on Morris Avenue. My concern is with Morris Avenue. First, I understand the bridge being open, it's great, it makes traffic go through, but we're back to the problem we had before the bridge closed, which is the amount of traffic that is on this road. The first week that the bridge was open, somebody was hit on the bridge on a bike. First day of school, a middle school kid drive on his bike was hit again. There was a car accident Monday, there was a car accident on Tuesday. There was 4 schools around the same time that are having kids get dropped off. You have the high school, you have Kent Place, Oratory, and Washington.
And Lincoln Hubbard behind it.
And Lincoln Hubbard behind it. I'm sure you guys have seen it. It's a parking lot, and it's getting dangerous because people are making it to like a 4-lane road where you have some people turning onto Norwood and people going straight. The problem is people coming out of Norwood making a left onto Morris Avenue don't see the people going straight up Morris Avenue. And that's where the problems are becoming. Same with the intersection with Morris and Bedford. Is there a way we can get a signage that says no left turns during certain times, similar to what's on Springfield?
See, the other day I was was on Morris Avenue during, like at 7:30. And you're absolutely right, it's a complete parking lot, and it's chaotic also because there are people coming from the high school back out.
Correct.
Right? As they drop off people, they come out, and then and so they want to make a left turn or join the traffic. But I saw a police officer there directing traffic, right by the intersection near Bedford.
He's at Weaver. He's at
At
Weaver.
Weaver.
Oh, it's Weaver, but
Yeah,
that's only
further
for.
down.
So then what
But-
happens is you
Coming in and
get the
out of
traffic between Bedford, popping off of Bedford onto
All the
Morris
way
to
up.
either jump over to Weaver or popping onto Morris to go left. Then you have the traffic pattern that the left turn onto Norwood to drop one's child over to Kent Place, and then you have everybody in the right lane trying to go proceed up Morris Avenue. And then someone, like Leslie says, will try to pull out and left onto Norwood. We had a colleague, a friend, who lost a pet last year. Someone just came out of Norwood and literally,
I think what we can do is
It's bad.
we'll tell the safety committee, which none of the three of us sit on, but we'll also tell the safety committee and the police chief to do some kind of analysis,
some sort of a study.
study of specifically that, and is the same condition in the afternoon when people get, or is it better in the
I think
afternoon?
it's better in the afternoon.
I personally couldn't answer that because I'm still at work, so I don't get to see the cutoff
Yeah,
traffic.
yeah.
I'm there both times. So I'd say it's a little better in the afternoon. I think that there's not the same concentration. There's not people also going to work.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then kids after school, a lot of them have practices or after-school activities, and they're going like in different directions. There's not that same full
Cluster,
concentration
right.
of cars. So I think it's primarily in the morning that the problem is.
And then the traffic of people going to work.
People are like, yeah, people are leaving their houses to go to work, and then all the
Yeah.
kids are going to school, and people are anxious because they're trying to get to work on time, and they're trying to get to school on time, and so people are anxious
If it
as
rains,
well.
it's 10 times worse. I
Yeah.
happened to see that child that morning at Bedford, and that sort of shook me up. Because I was
What,
on my way to school.
the car?
I didn't see it. I was in my house and I heard the sirens again yesterday or
Yeah.
today going, and I thought, here we go. But when I left my house, I made a right onto Morris because I was going somewhere before work. And as I got to Bedford, I saw the police car just before
Yeah.
Bedford and Morris. And as I was driving by, as we all do, we looked and I saw this child on the sidewalk with his mangled bicycle with no helmet. And I thought, oh, God,
Right.
I work with kids all day, so my first thought was it was a Washington school child, so I called the secretary to say, anybody called? Did you have are you missing a child this morning yet? And no. And then I found out that it was a child who recently relocated to Summit and was in Route 2, the middle school, and got hit. I've heard a story, but I wouldn't repeat it because I didn't see it.
Okay.
It was upsetting. It was a hard way to start the day to see
Well,
kids
of
sitting
course,
on the
of course.
sidewalk.
Yeah, naturally.
I've heard a few different versions too, so I wouldn't repeat them. either, 'cause
Exactly,
I don't know exactly
exactly.
what happened, but I think we can all agree that the traffic's bad there,
Yeah.
and it causes people to make bad decisions because
Right.
it's crowded and busy, and it's
And
hard
it's
to get through
pervasive
there on
all
time.
over town. It's just not our street, so we
Right.
realize that too.
Yeah, well,
But that area in
that particular
I
area
think
is a confluence of
with
events.
the five
Yes.
schools and the Morris Avenue Bridge being open and new traffic patterns, I think, I think there's a few areas in town where the police have been waiting to do a traffic study because there wasn't much point in doing it while the bridge was closed.
Sure.
So I think they'll be very amenable to doing that now that the bridge is open.
Yeah.
Can I just say one
Oh,
more thing?
absolutely, yeah.
I know Kent Place did ask their parents when they're coming out not to make a left onto Morris Avenue.
Right.
And to make everybody go right,
Yeah.
to alleviate some of the problems, but
And the police officer there at Weaver helped with the high school in and out
That's-
traffic,
yeah,
but
that's
still,
the-
that's only one of the bottlenecks. So-
Right, that's the
Yeah.
outtake. So when they drop off here and they come down Weaver and the parents have to go left or right onto Morris, he's there to
Right, to,
do the traffic. I think they stop around 7:45 in the morning,
Mhm.
7:50, then
so
he's
that
gone.
helps a little bit at that bottleneck, but that's not the only bottleneck, so.
I can add, I'm not familiar with that intersection, but I am familiar with the no left turn on Springfield, from Springfield onto Bryant Parkway. And I can tell you that doesn't really help. At least
Yeah.
the sign, the way it is right now, does not help.
Right.
I don't know if changing the sign so that it's a physical no left with, flashing lights or what, but people use it as a cut through and they turn there all the time, and it's very hard for those of us who are residents to back out in the morning because there's a little curve in the road
Right.
and people are going too fast
blind
because
spot.
it's a wide,
Right.
it's wider than a normal street, but it's not, there are cars parked all along, people who are going to the park, so it's kind of a problem. If you're backing out, cars are whizzing, and then they hit that curve, and they don't realize that some of us are trying to back out, and we get honked. I got honked the other day. Somebody was parked directly behind my driveway. They were still in the driver's seat. There was plenty of space in front of them to move. They saw me backing out. They were watching me, and because I was getting they made them nervous because I was backing out close to their car because I have to do the K-turn.
Sure.
And they honked me, and they're sitting in their car right, I'm thinking, move, like
in my
move,
driveway.
go forward,
Right.
And so that particular sign, it's not effective enough. The police are there several times during the week. It doesn't seem to matter.
All right,
So
well-
some of these things, I don't know if you've noticed in some areas of town, we're trying some new things to try to bring the speeds down. I mean, there's 3 E's they always say to traffic safety, right? There's education, just telling people slow down and, pay attention, and signage and those things. And there's enforcement, which is giving tickets, but the police can't be everywhere at once, obviously. And then there's engineering, which is, taking some steps to force people to slow down. So we've tried the education enforcement piece for a long time, and now we know that there's some areas that are consistently problem areas, and so we're piloting some things to try to see if it makes a difference. So I don't know, it's not directly in those areas of town, but we've put the speed humps on
Yes.
Woodland and on Ashland, and we're going to do more traffic studies to see if that is making a difference, and if it is, and it's effective, then we'll put them in more places.
Okay, good.
We've installed 4-way stop signs in a number of places around town. Now there's 2 new ones on Whitridge, there's on Ashland, there's one on in Pine Grove.
Right.
A number of 4-way stop signs, which have helped people to slow down and, everyone stop and go through to increase the safety of those intersections. We've had some, the flashing stop signs in
That's
places
a
where
point of
people.
contention for me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yep,
I
so we're
apologize.
trying some of these things, and they might not all work.
Okay.
They're not universally popular, but we're trying some things to see, and then we go back and do the traffic studies to see if they're making a difference, to see if they're helping with the issues. And if they are effective, then we'll roll out more. and see more
Let me
areas
just
to do it.
add, just say, I think part of the reason we did the one in Woodland, right, there's 2 of them on Woodland, is that that's a cut through to the downtown. And to your point, that there are people who are not residents in
Yeah,
Summit.
that's what
And
it
it's
is.
also a street that leads to a school that's right there on its way.
And
And there's no,
they're
and,
Trying to
and,
get into Springfield, they're trying to get onto 24,
For-
they're trying to get onto 7.
right. And so that, and when I go talking to people on Canoe Brook, when I go talking to people on Butler Parkway, they're like, can we get people on Wade? We're like, and I never thought Wade, which doesn't even have a direct extension. But when people come now, what happens is the traffic gets directed into Wade to avoid Woodland, and so it's kind of one of those things. But if people on Bryant Parkway, if your neighbors are like, you know what, this is crazy, you guys, part of the thing with Woodland was certainly the residents in that neighborhood were very frustrated about this.
Right.
There's certainly a lot of them now. I mean, there was a lot of debate before on sidewalks. I'll tell you, my walking around talking to people, there's a lot of enthusiasm in the community for neighborhoods to have sidewalks because it becomes very unsafe, especially neighborhoods that have little kids in them or people, or older people who, can't jump out of the way if there's a fast-moving car, frankly.
Right.
And so, so those are the things we're going to be looking at. I think we're going to try to come out to the community with a sidewalk master plan later on this year or the early part of next year and say, okay, these are the areas. Some of it is also just to show connectivity where sometimes the sidewalk ends in the middle of a street. I mean, like you're walking down and then suddenly after that there's no sidewalk. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Well,
But if your neighborhood wants to have like a speed hump or something like that,
So my neighbor has contacted, she contacted me. She said she's contacted everybody but one person, so she's waiting to talk to them. But
Okay.
everybody so far is on board about a speed bump.
There-
hump.
There is a process. I mean,
Yeah.
they do studies where they will put, the police has a traffic unit, and they will work with the engineers, the city engineers, and they have traffic monitors, so they take like a week of data on what the speeds are, what the volume of traffic is, to pinpoint where on the street the speeding issues are, and then they have to look at sort of the engineering aspects of what the roadway looks like. So if you have a curve on your road, they can't put a speed bump on a curve or an uphill or a downhill. So there's certain.
They could do it maybe before the curve so people slow
Well,
down.
if that's where the speeding is, so they have,
Right.
you know, I think residents sometimes think like the engineers just one day wake up and decide this is where we're going to put a speed hump, but there's a lot of data behind where those
Good.
decisions are made. I mean, it's a pretty systematic process, so just to understand, you know, you may think your street is a great candidate, but, you know, once they do all the you know, all the, you know, all the
Studies.
monitoring of the speed, the studies, that's the word I'm looking for. And they look at the actual conditions of the road, it may or may not be
Okay.
But I think
the right
the
solution.
But from my personal perspective is that everything Marjorie says is absolutely right, but also it helps to know that the neighborhood wants it.
Yes,
Right.
that's
Right?
another
So,
piece.
you know, we're going to, if a neighborhood is completely opposed to it and every single neighbor comes out and says, no
Right.
way, it becomes kind of hard to do that. But if people all come out and say, yes, this is, then it becomes like, okay, let's see, engineering-wise, can it be
Right.
done? Does it
Right.
make sense? Is that the right place to do it?
And she claimed that there's a study that was already done that showed there was a ton more traffic on Bryant Parkway than the city expected. So I don't, she
I
said
know
it
the
was.
that
city
might
has
be
been
true. I don't
monitoring
know.
Bryant
Yeah.
Parkway.
That I don't know the
I've had
details.
discussions about
Okay.
that.
That may very well be true. We don't
All right.
know
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
I'll wrap it quick.
Sure.
I've noticed two areas. I happen to have a neighbor who's visually impaired and uses a guide dog. She's extremely active and she's very, very, very independent. I've witnessed two things now for her that disturb me. One is when you're coming down Beechwood Road and you're approaching Union Place. Because of the turn, the turnabout, there's no stop sign. So I've seen cars just, and again, it's, you're in the car, you're picking up your spouse, your kid, you're not thinking, and and I've seen people just zip through and turn. And last week I was walking my dog through town and I happened to see her crossing from the train station over to get onto Union Place by Starbucks. And I saw a car whiz by. And I held my breath because I don't always want to yell out because I don't want to startle her, and then her dog will not follow his commands. He's still young yet. So when she got to the corner and I said, Tiff, are you comfortable here or do you want to go back up Beechwood? She said, no, I'm fine. But I knew she knew that that car had gone by her. Two other times I witnessed, and it's at the corner of DeForest and Norwood Avenue where they're at United Methodist Church. There are 4 of those signs
Right.
that you press a button. They
beacons.
don't, right. I personally took a picture of one at a specific time with my hand on it. It didn't light up. I sent it to certain parties to say this isn't working. I've seen her try to get across and they don't light up. The bigger part is if she's coming around United Methodist Church from, say, Winberry's, that's a 3-way intersection to empty onto DeForest. You can either go right towards CVS, straight down Norwood, or left onto Kent Place Boulevard. She was on the side to where you would turn to left on Kent Place Boulevard, and I saw her halfway in the middle of the intersection, and I saw some impatient person just like charge into the crosswalk while she was still there. Again, the second time I had to literally stop in the middle of the intersection to say, everybody stop. And she stood on the corner and I said, you can cross now, Tiffany. And she left. She said, thank you. But if I wasn't there, what could have happened?
Yeah.
So you're saying the beacons are not working?
I think they're aware of that. I think
They are
Yeah,
aware of
we
it.
report it all the
Yeah,
time.
they're
It
aware,
it randomly,
But she's not the only sighted person in town that uses that intersection.
No, I understand it. Just wanted to make sure I understood that.
They're working on that.
They're working on
I know
that.
that we've talked about, Chief Wood and I talked about that now.
I'd like to welcome our mayor, who, from her office hours.
I know, I had lots of visitors tonight.
We've been talking about traffic and safety and road safety and so forth.
Okay.
A lot of discussion.
Okay.
I went online and I read some of its feasibility study. Personally, I'm a visual learner, okay? Auditory and visual. Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences tells us that every child, as every adult, has different modalities of learning. Personally, I'm a visual and an auditory learner. So when I heard all this rails to trails and this Bloomingdale, whatever it is, trail in Chicago, I'm like, and every time I pass common council members, I hear, I'm thinking to myself, it seems like they're trying to, something somebody doesn't want me to hear. So I went online and I read the feasibility. It's kind of hard to find. It's kind of hidden in plain view.
Can I ask you what
What
feasibility study are you
yeah.
referring to?
Feasibility study.
And I want to take issue that we're talking behind your back or trying to hide things from you, because I think that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. So
It's happened more than once.
I'm going to take issue to that, that if we're making comments, we're trying to understand what's going on or something. I've never heard personally, I've never tried to hide something from you or anyone else who's come to a council meeting. I've never heard anyone else doing that either. So I think that's a misperception, and that's, I
But
think
let's
issue
take
with
it,
that.
I mean,
But I don't know what
As far as the
feasibility
park
study.
line, we've tried to open up the process.
Right, but let's take a step back.
Yes.
What feasibility study?
SummitParkline.org.
Okay,
That's-
so wait, no,
That's-
let's take a step back,
Right.
right? So that is the Summit Parkline Foundation. So that's not the city, and that's not council, and so that is an independent 501c3 organization.
The
Just
last
like-
meeting I was at, there was a pretty heated debate.
Right, there was a pretty heated debate, so let's get everybody knowing what we're talking about, and then we can get the parameters, right? So the last council meeting that we discussed the park line, which was 2 council meetings ago, the first meeting in September 4th, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
there was a memorandum of understanding between the Summit Parkline Foundation and the city. Why did we do that? Because prior councils had operated with regard to the park line in an ad hoc fashion. What I mean by that is that they kept on saying, well, let's take one step and we'll approve this, and if we get funding, we'll go to the next one, but if we don't, then nothing happens. So each time as things came up, we were moving incrementally towards building a park line without necessarily getting a comprehensive understanding or community involvement. Now, people who are in favor of the park line, and there are plenty of people who favor the park line, will give you the arguments for why it is a good thing, why does it benefit, and why it is also, by the way, just so everybody's clear, it's part of the master plan. There is a reference to the park line in the master plan, which was an open process. There were multiple hearings, and I will tell you because I was and still am the planning board, and we had meetings till 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning over every single word in that master plan. We marked it page by page, and I sat there with my colleagues, so I will tell you, it was carefully thought out, and it was done after multiple meetings, at least 2, with the public, and getting probably thousands of comments online through the process. But what we didn't have till September was a clear understanding of what the responsibilities of the city are and what the responsibilities of the foundation are vis-a-vis if this project were to go forward, who would be responsible for paying for what components and how it would be done. The next step of this process is to have a public workshop in which safety and traffic and other issues that were raised. Privacy. All of the issues that were raised in the September 4th meeting are issues that have been previously raised in other discussions or just raised generally, but nobody has sat down and said, here is a plan for addressing it, and whether you, the public, are satisfied with that plan. The workshop is intended to do that. We have 90 days from signing up, from having approved that agreement to when that workshop will be done. This is as transparent a program as you possibly can have from January 1, 2018. I can't vouch for what happened in the past as how people ran councils before. I'm telling you how we are running this council. This is a pretty transparent policy.
This isn't even what I'm talking about.
But no, I want to address the thing about whispering. I want it very clear, because I don't want the misimpression that somehow we are doing something behind people's back. I don't like that impression, so I want to make that very clear, because you can't get a more transparent policy than saying, hey, here's what we're doing. We've given you now an agreement. Before, what would have happened is people could have gone piecemeal, and before you know it, you have something done. This is as comprehensive. Now, go ahead.
I read all 58 pages.
Of their feasibility study. That's them.
It took me 3 hours, I read the entire
Fair
thing,
enough.
and I took 8 pages of notes.
Okay.
This isn't even about the park lot.
Okay.
Ultimately, what's going to happen is that, and I quote pages 11 through 15, connections to local and regional destinations
last paragraph, the RVRR stretches well beyond the study area. A future extension of the park line beyond that which is currently proposed in this feasibility study would connect Summit to other regional parks and recreational resources in Union County. The Raritan Valley Railroad would connect Hidden Valley Park in Summit, Bryant Park in Summit, I can't pronounce this, Hoodale Quarry in Summit and Springfield, Mizell Park in Springfield, the Broadway River Park in Springfield, Galloping Hill Golf Course in Kenilworth, the Blackbrook Park in Kenilworth, ending in Roselle Park on Westfield Avenue. If fully extended, the park line would connect downtown Summit to the East Coast Greenway, a national trail system that extends from Calais, Maine, which is apparently is on the Canadian border, to the Florida Keys by means of a 30-minute bike ride. That's the bottom line. That's what all of this isn't about East Summit. This isn't about the park line. This is about connecting it to these other county parks and this East Coast Greenway.
That study was done by a small group of people who have a vision that is not aligned with anyone sitting up here at this table. And I'd love to finish my sentence.
There's 700 miles, mostly within New Jersey.
The operative word in that paragraph you read was if. And because David persevered so strongly throughout this past year to get this memorandum of understanding in place, council and the city now has control of this process. There was no structure. There was no control. We now have control of this process. Nothing happens unless council approves it. That's the bottom line.
And council will not approve anything without going through this very transparent process, which was delineated in this agreement. And that's what this agreement did. It laid out the process by which this project will either go forward or not go forward. And how it's going to be done with community involvement and community input in an incredibly transparent and above board way, all the way through. And as I said at that meeting, I'm not in support or against the park line. I have not made up my mind. I have very serious concerns that would have to be addressed before I could ever be in favor of this. I'm sure that many of you who are directly affected by the park line have concerns as well. This is going to not go forward until those concerns are addressed and we figure out if this is going to work. If this is going to work for the community.
The other thing is, what you're quoting from is a piece from, as I said, the foundation. The foundation has its own perspective on what it, that's a feasibility study that isn't the city's feasibility study. We didn't sign on to this feasibility study. Some group of people said, hey, I like the idea of a park line. And what would this park line, if I had the broadest vision possible, what could it achieve? Well, it could achieve this connectivity to the eastern, it could achieve connectivity to the Appalachian Trail. I don't know what it could connect to, but it can connect to different things. That's what their vision is. That, as the mayor said, that's not necessarily, and that's it.
I have not heard this discussed at any of these meetings, all of these parts that want to be connected to, and this East Coast. I've never heard of this.
So that's a legitimate thing to bring up at the workshop. Let's talk about it and say, when people are there for the foundation, hey, how is this what your plan is? Is your plan to work step by step towards this connectivity? Let's hear them out. This is their proposal. It's not ours. So this is something that it's a legitimate.
Ultimately, it's your decision.
No, it's not. It's our decision with regard to Summit. It's not certainly our decision with regard to, first of all, this assumes, by the way, that different towns will be doing different things. Springfield will have to do some portion, some other town, Kenilworth. All those towns will have to take responsibility. For us, the question is, does the park line make sense for Summit? Does it make sense from a privacy standpoint? Does it make sense from a safety standpoint? Does it make sense from a standpoint of doing, how much the width is? One of the discussion topics that came up during that meeting is looks at some points that road is very narrow and has a steep embankment. People raise that concern. So the idea of having both a bike lane as well as a pedestrian walkway need not even physically be feasible in certain portions, because you made it so narrow. You need a certain amount of room. You can't have two-way traffic with bikes at the same time that you have pedestrians walking and you have no room and somebody's going to fall off the edge. So I would say caution you in the following sense. Yes, it's perfectly legitimate to raise that at the workshop and talk about it, but it's also not what is within the purview of what we are focused on. We first have to focus on, is this possible in Summit? This is like many, 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 many steps down the road.
This has been in the works since 1989.
It's
Has
been an
any
idea.
portion of that done, though?
Sorry?
It's been an idea since
Has Springfield done any portion of
Pursuant to
that?
the New Jersey Orphan Bridge and Abandoned Railroad Bond Act of 1989,
Right.
the city is currently working with New Jersey DOT to complete the access land application that will allow for public use of the right-of-way.
But let me ask you this question. Have you heard Springfield doing anything?
No, I haven't.
No, exactly. They haven't. And they haven't. Kenilworth, have they done anything?
The
No,
only
they
part of
haven't.
that's been accomplished, Mary Jo, is that we have signed an agreement with New Jersey DOT that allows us to use the right-of-way.
This
For
is the
our
list
portion,
of
for our portion.
Rail trails in New Jersey, established rail trails
Yeah,
throughout.
it exists. But it doesn't mean that we are going to be able, we are going to decide that we are part of that. There's so much that we have to look at in Summit before we, it's so far down the road, and it's not even within the purview of what the Summit Council is considering, which is only, does it make sense to have any of this in Summit? Is it good, is it what our residents want? That's our, and is it safe? Can we secure it? Can we address the
concerns?
privacy issues? Can we do all of that? If we can, to the satisfaction of the vast majority of residents involved, maybe it'll go forward. If we can't, it won't.
The idea, this thing, I mean, so, you know, I mean, obviously I do work as an environmental lawyer as my professional capacity. I mean, it gets complicated, and I've worked with engineers and environmental folks over different projects. These types of projects have a lot of different issues involved in them. It's not simply you have how do you take care of the railroad ties. Some places it's easier to take care of railroad ties than others. You just pave it. Some places it's a steep slope issue. Is it possible to go ahead? And what about access? How will that work for safety vehicles? Where will you find parking? All these issues are not, if you're talking about their vision, every one of those issues that I have talked to you about is also an issue in every other town along the way that needs to be considered. And then finally, after all of that, there's a simple thing, money.
Money.
Who is going to fund it, right? It is not as if we have the Parkline Foundation, the Summit Parkline Foundation. Unless the Summit Parkline Foundation decides to go funding in Springfield and Kenilworth and every other town and start raising money, they themselves have to figure out how they're going to fund it. Money is a big factor in what things get done.
Well, if you care to look, this is a list of established rail trails in New Jersey, and we are under the proposed rail trails. And I understand that, as my daughters tell me, any college student will tell you that Wikipedia isn't the best source of information, but that's...
I mean, I'm happy to take it. I mean, it's fine. I mean, I think we know that there are people who are, as I started this discussion, we know that there's lots of people in this town that are very much avidly enthusiastic about doing the Parkline. And they do it because not because they think that they're harming any particular segment of the community or want to impose or do anything like that. From their perspective, they believe that this will be an amenity that everybody will enjoy, that people in that area will enjoy. And in fact, that evening, if you recall, when we had the council meeting, there were a number of residents who live in that area who said that they were in favor of it and would like to see it, including people who live right adjacent to it. So I think we all need to step back a little bit, realize this is going to still be a long-term process, but the next step in this process is to have an open public workshop where issues, including what you are raising tonight, can be discussed with people who are going to have different opinions about it and say, yeah, that's a great idea. Somebody's going to say probably, yeah, why not? Why couldn't we have a great rail system? Because trail system, because I'd love to bike from here to the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know. But we will hear everybody's opinion.
And the other thing is that this memorandum of understanding allows us to, there's a process now. Things got approved without council actually going through a resolution process, which meant that the public was not necessarily informed. Now there's going to be a public process for every step of this project. And, it will come before council, we'll have a resolution, the community can come in and comment before we, and there'll be a process before we make any decisions.
Well, here's the other thing, and I just found this today, under the memorandum of understanding, number 16. The parties agree and acknowledge that the city's responsibilities under this MOU are only for the parkland, including the path to Upper Overlook Road on the property owned by Overlook Hospital, and any work performed by the foundation or foundation partners, affiliates, supporters, or individuals affiliated with the foundation partners. On property owned by third parties other than Overlook is the responsibility of the foundation, for which the city takes no liability or control, for which the foundation has an independent obligation to negotiate terms and conditions on use and operation.
Absolutely.
Now, I am not a lawyer, but
Yes.
He is.
I am.
I
you
am.
are.
Four lawyers.
We're lawyers,
This
so.
is what I hear when I read that.
Okay.
And we'll tell you.
So you would actually-
The city takes no liability or control, for which the foundation has an independent obligation.
Absolutely.
So you're telling me that the people who live on Michigan Avenue, whom I stopped a couple yesterday in CVS in Providence, and they had no idea what I was talking about, number one. But so hypothetically, if you have somebody get hurt on this park line, and it happens to be on somebody's property, whose liability is that?
Okay, so let's take it a step, first of all. What this is meant to
Not
address.
according to this.
No, so
Mary Jo,
let's...
let him explain it to you.
Let me explain it. Because I actually helped write this thing, so I kind of know what I intended to say in the document. So the park line, for instance, and this is what, when Councilwoman Fox was talking about, is we ended up in a situation where we inherited essentially having a trail system that was built on Overlook's property. And we were told, okay, this was previously approved, kind of understood, agreed upon between the city and Overlook and the Parkland Foundation. And so we ended up having inherited that. It is not a good thing for us as taxpayers to have a private foundation go and enter into agreements for a portion of a property to have a trail system and then say, well, congratulations, you, the city, have inherited this trail system, and now you're, as the city, we as the taxpayers then become liable for what happens there. So we said, okay, if you enter into an agreement with a third party has property along the park line, decides that you, the foundation, want to make it a part of the Parkline Foundation, guess what? We as the city aren't going to be responsible for it.
Then who is?
That's the Parkline
Parkland.
Foundation and the owner of the property.
So the parkland is always going to have an open bank account that, God forbid, something should happen, that when they get sued?
They and the third party.
They're the third
So
party.
that's what I'm asking now. So if it's on somebody's private property.
If
that-
you as a
that-
private property owner decide, to enter into an agreement with a Parkline Foundation, we as the city are not going to cover your private contracts.
So exactly.
There's no way, actually, I'll just, so finish the point, let me finish the point. That is true,
No,
that is
no,
true
let-
for,
let him
let
finish.
me- that is true regardless of Parkline or any. If two private entities enter into an agreement that they think may be beneficial to everybody, that's great for them. The rest of us who didn't have a say in your formulating an agreement are not going to be liable because you guys, two people decided to make an agreement. That's how contract law works forever. Two parties decide to make an agreement, bravo. You guys inherit all that liability. You guys inherit all those obligations. The rest of us who weren't party to that agreement don't get to cover your tab.
So I think what Mary Jo and you were talking about different things, because you're talking about, and the agreement.
Agreement, that's what the
The
agreement's
agreement
for.
says if two parties, the Parkline Foundation and another party, a third party, whether it's a homeowner or Overlook Hospital, can enter into an agreement.
So that's what I'm asking.
Then,
As
so
a
what,
homeowner,
as a homeowner, but if the
they're
homeowner,
taking on the responsibility. of
no, the
something should
homeowner,
happen.
only if that homeowner makes an agreement with the Parkline Foundation.
Well, exactly, but do the residents know this? Do they know what they're getting into?
But no,
They
there is-
aren't-
But they
They're not
aren't
going to
taking
do
it.
that.
Which homeowner is going to take on that liability?
Well, isn't this going through Michigan Avenue?
But it is
No.
going on the easement. When it goes through
It's
Michigan.
not on private property,
It's
it's
not
on the
private-
easement.
When it goes through any kind of neighborhood, the Parkline Foundation, the road itself is the railroad. The easement is what Union County is able to give the city, and that easement is properly defined as being a specific area. It is not the homeowner's property. Now, the homeowner may think all this time they have gone up to the buffer or wherever the easement line is, and they think it's maybe theirs. But there is an easement, just like any other property. The county is a property owner, or the railroad's a property owner, and just like any other property owner, it has rights to basically lease out, license out that property to any other party, and that's what's happened. Yes?
Page 26 of the feasibility study. by a number of private parcels located at critical access locations that could constrict, compromise, or diminish the design effectiveness to the parkland. The right of which bisects the campus of Celgene, which would necessitate the development of an alternate routing option. Furthermore, the right of way abuts the side and rear yards of multiple residential properties.
Okay, so
They're
to,
blank. We have to-
No, but
No,
it,
no,
well,
no,
it may
it
apply.
doesn't say it. It
doesn't
That's what
say there's an
want.
agreement.
That hasn't been agreed to. That nothing's been agreed to.
but let's
That's
just
what
step
they
back, hold
want.
up, hold
That's
on,
their-
hold on,
that's
hold on.
their desire.
No,
We should move on to other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, because but we can have an
Other
offline
questions.
discussion. But let me just finish this one point. But I don't want to leave it. I don't want to leave a misimpression. Okay, property owners who abut an easement that is held by the county, by the county's property, their property rights are not changed in one iota under this memorandum of understanding by whatever the county has done. Okay, they have exactly. Tomorrow, they pick up the phone and they say to the Parkline Foundation, guess what? I want to sell my house and my property to you, and you can then use it for whatever you want. That's their business, okay? And that's the same case as Celgene. Celgene decides tomorrow, guess what? I want to enter into an agreement with the Parkline Foundation so we can reroute this parkline. Okay? That's between the Parkline Foundation and Celgene. Because no longer are they following the easement. The city's responsibility, because of an agreement that the city agreed to 2 years ago, notwithstanding my vote, they agreed to, we are only responsible for that easement portion. We're not responsible for, nor are we going to take responsibility for, at least not until while we're around, we're not going to take responsibility for private parties entering into agreements with a private foundation. We'll move on. You can say it could be a Parkline. It could be a Parkline question, but it's my question, but it could be something.
I live on Bryant Parkway, and the park is always very crowded, and I can't see any more people being stuck in that space because it's very alluring for many people to, just walk around. There's so much traffic there now. They see it, and then they come and enjoy it, and especially on the weekends, kids go running there. There's mothers with babies, there's elderly with dogs, and I don't see how they could be bicyclists and other people using that park when it's already kind of overused. So to wind up there, just there, I don't know how that's going to work out.
Well, I mean, I think probably advocates would argue, like if I was sitting there and if I was arguing for the Parkline, what I would say is, okay, now you're giving people an extension, if you will, right? So you're giving them an avenue that instead of just going on Bryant Park, you can walk them down through the Parkline to an extension, and you can have an additional area. So maybe then you would have less congestion, right?
Maybe they'll go to the quarry.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is a
I
picture
think
of Bryant Parkway the morning after our town council. This is to show you that there's, except for one spot,
It's crowded.
all the way along already. So my question to you all is, because I read that feasibility study in it, and I was very generous the last town council when I said they might put a few, a tiny lot with a few cars, because I had read that thrown in on the feasibility. Basically it said, no, there's no reason to add parking really on the Bryant Parkway side. It said, if we need it, we'll add a couple spaces. And then after I spoke, a man who represented the foundation said, there's no plan for parking. So I'm thinking, okay, he just proved my point. There's no plan for parking, but the cars will come because people are going to want to take advantage of it. They're going to want to throw their kids' bikes in the car and start at the end and go through to maybe the hospital and then come back to their car and then drive back to wherever.
Right.
So my question is, what is the plan for the increased traffic and parking?
And that has to be discussed at the workshop. This is not the,
It's
forum.
one of many
That's one of
concerns
the
that we
many
have.
concerns,
What
yes.
do you do with the cars? What do you do with the parking? What do you do with safety? Right, because there's parts of the proposed park line that the foundation's proposing, there's parts that it would be very difficult to access for fire and police, right? What do you do about the parts of the park line that go right behind people's houses? There needs to be, they have privacy concerns that need to be addressed. There's all, there's areas where the proposed path for the park line may not be safe for for bicyclists and walkers. As David mentioned, there's all kinds of issues.
Okay. So just
there's
in
so
case I
many
can't make
things-
that meeting,
There are
that's
so
why
many
there's that
things
big
that need to be
Thank you.
looked at and addressed. And
Well,
that's-
traffic is one of them.
and
Traffic and
that's what
parking
this
is one of them.
memorandum of understanding does, is gives us a process now, instead of these things being done in the back room, or instead of these agreements
Right.
being made between private parties who are not open to this process and not going through the same process that a council would in a resolution where we have an open meeting, we have community involvement, where there's discussion, there's accountability. That gives that process. So
Yeah,
that
I
each
understand.
step of the way, it will now go through the regular council process where we will publish it ahead of time. There's chance for
And the reason we're doing
discussion
a
and
workshop
openness.
rather than having it at a council meeting, right, is that it allows for a little bit more openness in a dialogue, because otherwise you have that formality, as you know, at a council meeting, people come up, they give their comments, they sit back down, and then you don't have this back and forth that we're having right now. And so a workshop is intended, hopefully, that with the police chief, the fire chief there, and people with concerns, that you hear a little bit more of a more natural dialogue and a discussion.
But what is the summit master? You said it was in the master plan.
Right,
What
so
is-
back in 2016, I know you have a question, but hold on, let me,
What she's talking
yeah, let me just finish.
You won't, you don't need to, we will
We
get
got
to you.
you, we got you, we're good, we're good.
Teacher never leaves.
So back in 2016, every 10 years, a city has to do a master plan. And that is a process by which you look at how you want the city to evolve and develop in the next 10 years. Kind of like a vision statement, if you will. And part of that master plan deals with, for instance, economic development, how we want the downtown or areas around the downtown. When we talk about Broad Street redevelopment, that's not talked about in the abstract. That's because we had a long and detailed discussion during the master plan process for which residents came out in support of doing a Broad Street redevelopment. But part of also what was discussed is connectivity and green spaces and so one of the things...
Safety, pedestrian activity.
Yep, absolutely, sidewalks, all of these things that we're talking about today are things that are outgrowths of what people said to us in the master plan process. And so this park line was one of the things that was added into the master plan as one of the mechanisms for increasing connectivity between different portions of the town. So that's the answer.
Nothing in the master plan says, it's a set of guidelines, it's a vision statement. So nothing in the park plan, for instance, the master plan does not say, we must have a park line. It's just saying certain things that can be considered, that can be looked at.
Right.
And it just gives you this overarching kind of, guidelines of where we want the city to go.
So just FYI, in the late 1990s, I don't know if you were living there at that point, late 1990s, I had just moved back to Summit in 1994, okay? The Summit Soccer Club tried to install soccer fields in Bryant Park, okay? And it was determined, because it was county land, it was protected land. So they are not supposed to be putting any parking lot anywhere on Bryant Park's property.
What about Orchard?
Orchard, I don't know, but they can't touch the park, it's protected land.
Okay, yes, please. I'm sorry, I don't know you, we don't know your name, I don't know, at least I don't.
Dion Wardell.
I'm sorry?
I've lived in Summit most of my life.
No, I'm sorry, your name again, please?
Dion Wardell.
Okay, thank you.
And so now I live in East Summit, and so I'm concerned for all of Summit, basically, because that's where I've lived most of my life. And the whole thing is, why is Overlook going ahead with already investing and doing things if they're not sure that everything is going to go forward?
Well, I think from Overlook's perspective, it's within their land, and it gives maybe it gives an amenity for people who work at the hospital to go walking on a trail during the day. You know, it's a little trail. It's not, and actually, I will tell you, it's a cute little trail. It's a very nice little trail. It's
already there.
well done. It's people did a nice job with it. It's a cute little trail.
I let them walk through downtown without crossing streets and things. So
Yeah.
it's like an amenity for their employees, it's an amenity for some of the people who live in the area, so.
But again, that was
little
done
section of
before
it was
we
done
had an agreement
before we
and
had the
before we
agreement.
were on council, except for,
Yeah. Also, how are we going to connect it across Morris Avenue?
So you would need a bridge, right?
You're going to build a bridge?
I'm not
We're
saying we're
not.
going to build a bridge.
That's-
I'm saying you
that's
would need a
the
bridge. See,
It
this
would
is-
be needed,
Yeah, I
but
said
it
it
doesn't
would be-
mean it's going to happen. This is so
No, but we
premature.
just took down the bridge
That's what
from
they want
on
to
Orchard
do,
Street,
yeah.
going into
Two bridges they
Springfield.
don't protect.
So this is why some of this stuff, right? So talking about we're going to connect all the way to the eastern seaboard. I think we should recognize that yeah, that's a vision. People have lots of visions, right? To achieve it, there's lots of things that go in the way. You have to see about a feasibility for a bridge. You have to see the height clearance for a bridge, because, for instance,
It's a county road, you
It's
gotta
a
get
county
approval from
road.
the county.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much that has to be, it's so far down the road, if it ever happens.
I also went on the East Coast Greenway website, and each state has 3 to 4 representatives per state willing to make this thing happen.
But they can't force us to do anything.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you.
We are not obligated in Summit to do anything
and
that we don't
I
want to do.
think we should just
No obligation.
And let me ask you now, in the back of the hospital, you're going down the hill from Morris Avenue, there's a walkway there. And
Back of the hospital,
that's
yes.
Part of,
That's
that's
the-
where it starts.
That's where it is.
Okay. That's a dangerous spot. I don't have to tell you that, right? Now, there used to be a house on Morris Avenue. The back of it was at the parking lot from Mountain Avenue for the nurses to park, okay? There used to be a house there in the corner. There used to be another house on Morris Avenue where the light is now, when you're coming off Glenside. There used to be a house there too. I'm assuming that they were removed because they were in a dangerous place. So now you're telling me there's a walkway there to get on this park line, that when you're coming up the hill.
I'm not sure there's a walkway.
It doesn't go
up the
down
hill.
the sidewalk.
That way, it goes up the hill, towards the hospital.
But my point is, when you're coming around the bend, you can't see that staircase there.
But there's no staircase.
There's no staircase
There's
that's
something there.
it's not accessible to Morris Avenue.
Yeah, there's no staircase.
What's there then?
It goes into the hospital.
It
area.
goes, yeah, it goes up, Upper Overlook Road is where the trail comes out.
That's where it, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But that's a street that's off of Morris Avenue. They're not coming right onto Morris Avenue.
Nobody's coming onto Morris
The
Avenue.
walkway is in between Morris Avenue and Upper Overlook Road. It's right there in the corner.
No, actually, it's not. It comes down the driveway of the first house on Upper Overlook Road. I don't know what you're thinking of.
Because the paved portion of the park line ends at the railroad, where the railroad...
Where the bridge used to be.
Where the bridge used to be, so you can't...
It's fenced.
It's fenced, you
You
can't
can't go
drop.
anyplace.
And then before you get to there, on the right side is the trail that's unpaved.
It's a
and that-
wood chip trail.
and wood chip trail, and that goes up towards the hospital.
Right, and there's a house that Overlook Hospital owns, that's the first house in on Upper Overlook Road.
Right.
It goes down their driveway, but it's still quite a ways from Morris Avenue. It's probably a few hundred feet from Morris
No,
Avenue.
It's like maybe 5 feet from the road. We're not talking about the same place then.
I think we're
I'll have
not.
to take a picture of it.
Okay.
I have
Yes,
one
ma'am.
last question.
Sure.
Yes.
Why did Summit buy Bryant Park?
We didn't...
Summit didn't buy it.
County owns it.
County did.
Acquired?
Acquired.
The county owns Bryant Park.
Yeah, the county does. We don't.
I
According
thought
to
there
your
was
feasibility
something
study,
somewhere.
the
It's
city
not
of
ours.
Summit has ideated a potential opportunity to convert an abandoned piece of infrastructure into usable public space. Bryant Park was acquired from the state by Summit in 2016.
No.
That's not true.
That's not correct.
It's in black and white on the
But we
feasibility
didn't
study.
write
So this is like the Wikipedia issue. Like, we didn't write it on Wikipedia. I don't know.
It's misinformation. Actually, just today, I was on the phone with the county manager, talking about Bryant Park, because what a lot of people would like to see, it doesn't matter what the feasibility, I don't care what the Parkland Foundation
on your
wrote.
website. No, I know, but it's not correct.
So
That's
let-
not correct.
let-
You know what,
let's-
can I finish? Neither did we write it, so we need to be very clear here. We did not write it,
So I was looking for an author. Who did write it?
the Parkland Foundation.
Well, no, time
Or
out,
their
time
fee-
out.
or their consultant.
Whoever is the consultant, I'm sure there's a first page of the feasibility study that says prepared by.
I didn't see, I could be there, I didn't see. I didn't see footnotes, I didn't see links.
All right,
Let's just
so
go.
here's the thing. Honestly and truly, the Bryant Park is owned by the county. I was just on the phone today with the county manager talking about that the pond, it truly needs to be dredged. But it's a multi-million dollar project. And he said, the county doesn't have the money right now for it, and we talked about ways to try to get some grants, applied grants for some federals, the DEP, and other areas to get grants, to get the money to dredge the pond. And I said, I would love to, see if I could apply. I said, but Summit can't apply for anything because we don't own Bryant Park. He said, no, you don't. The county owns Bryant Park. And that's the county manager in a phone call today. So whatever they said in there is absolutely wrong. So what if it's in black and white? They're wrong.
So I can call the county when the trees fall down?
Yes,
and-
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
Great,
Yes.
great, good to know.
I mean, you can
We have
also
no
call
control
us
over
and
what the
we
foundation
will try
puts
to
on their
help.
website. We have no control what the
Because I-
foundation writes. That's
Right.
that's a
The
private
the
foundation.
report, I found it on the page, right? The first page says by WSP and Parsons Brinkerhoff.
That's who wrote it.
That's who wrote it,
That's a
not us.
consultant for the Parkland Foundation. And going back to if trees come down in Bryant Park, you can contact the city, but you should also contact the county.
Ask for I
Yeah, I did.
Good.
Okay, all right.
Any
Any other
other topics?
topics?
For what it's worth, I mean, I'm fascinated by this whole thing.
We're glad to entertain you.
Glad to hear
Leslie.
that.
It's a very interesting process.
Yeah, it
It's a very interesting project. It has tons of benefits and it has tons of concerns. So it's going to be a very, whatever ends up happening, it's going to be a really interesting project. It's going to be an interesting process. It's going to involve a lot of different parts of the community. So, you know, it's going to be a,
Stay involved.
yeah.
Leslie.
I swear, it's an easy question.
Okay.
Where does everything stand with the Broad Street redevelopment?
Oh, that's easy.
So we have.
Something that's
It's a
already,
safe question.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good question.
we've got responses or interest from 10 different developers.
Okay.
We have gone now to the second phase, which is asking them to present to us or give us general conceptual ideas of what they think would be feasible within the marketplace to do in that 10-acre parcel, to get their ideas. Because by law, we cannot designate a developer to work there until after we have approved a redevelopment plan. And we're not developers. So we thought it's a good idea to get their...
Backward process.
Right, to get their input as to what they think might be feasible, then we will come up with the redevelopment plan, and our hope is to have that, well, we're hoping to get these conceptual ideas back from them mid to late October.
Yeah, mid-October.
Mid-October.
October 10th.
Okay, and then our plan, our hope is to working with our planners and the planning board and the city, the council, to have the redevelopment plan ready and approved by the end of the first quarter.
Draft, though, we're going to have a draft and then go out for
Yes,
public
we're going to
comment.
have public comment before we have this approved to get people's input. And then we go through the next step is to have to approve a conditionally designate a developer or two, or however many, because one developer may not be interested in doing this entire parcel of 10 acres. And then we go from there.
so are you guys just going to present to the community one plan, or are we going to see different
We're going
plans?
to have, what it would be is what is considered the city's redevelopment plan. Okay? And then that would be either, I guess, there's multiple ways, but there'll be a lot of there'll be public opportunity either at the planning board stage or at the council's, and the council stage, or we can also have a workshop beforehand and we could have 3 different opportunities for the public. Public gets a chance to say, okay, these are the different uses that are conceivably going to happen in these areas. This is possibly the height. This is like what kind of design that we may be able to see in those areas. This is what's going to be out there. Then people will give us feedback and we will hear it and we will consider it. And then 2 different bodies have to vote on it. The planning board has to vote on it and then the council has to vote on it.
And when does it go to the public for us to look at it?
That would be before
okay.
before the votes. Each of the,
So what we'll be doing is looking at these conceptual plans and kind of picking out what we think are the things that fit the vision of the master plan, that fit with what we've heard from the community. We've already had 2 workshops where we've heard what people want to see, so we're going to be looking...
We kind of already know what people want.
We're going to be looking for the components that people have said they want, that developers have told us they can give us. And, you know, and try to come up with what we think the plan should look like based on the input we've gotten from the community and the input from the developers. Then we go back out to the community with, here's what we think the plan is, and then for another round of comments.
What do you
Right,
guys
because
think?
now we have the plan that, the idea that we present is, and it's a draft, but now it's not just blue sky thinking of what we in the community want, but it is also informed with the developers' thoughts and opinions about what's economically possible.
Yeah.
Right.
And what makes sense.
And that is the plan, ultimately, once it's approved, just so we all clear, that's the plan against which developers, that as Nora, the mayor said, that's the one that we'll have 1 or 2 or 3 developers. So the city, the community will have had multiple opportunities by that point in time to give their input as to what it is. But once we've gotten through that process, Then we're into negotiation with who is going to be actually going to be able to implement it, and what's the time frame for getting it implemented.
And is that sort of land that starts at the corner of like YMCA and Library when I look at the
Yeah,
map?
yeah, so Maple, so if you imagine Maple and then Morris as the dividing lines, so there's, the city parcels make up about 60% of that land, so that's the fire station building, there's 2 parking lots. The senior home is excluded, that's not going to be touched. And
Like across from City Hall, this, you know,
The
the
senior
Vito Gallo.
house.
the Vito Gallo building.
12 Chestnut Street.
12 Chestnut, but that's the only thing. Everything else is in play kind of thing for people to consider. The private parties that have buildings there, this is a non-condemnation process, which means that the developer would have to enter into a private agreement, going back to where the 2 parties want to agree, that's up to them. If they want to agree into an agreement, they agree, get into it. But we're not going to condemn any parcels. Developers know that. That may influence what developers want to do. They may want to only touch the city-owned parcels. They may want to work around the other stuff. Depends. Sometimes also private developers, private companies that own property owners say, you know what, when they start seeing the plan, they go, hey, wait a second, this is pretty good. I probably could do pretty well out here.
So you're saying that's between the church and the development, between St. Teresa's
Yep.
Church and the
St.
development?
Teresa's Church is not,
No,
the
it's
memorial hall.
the
Memorial
Hall,
Yes.
yeah.
So we have no interest or ability to do anything between the church and a developer. That would solely be between them.
And just so everybody's clear, that's exactly the same position every one of those property owners are in right now. Today, any single one of those private property owners can decide that they want out and they want to sell it to somebody else for some use that is compatible with that area. And that would be the case with the professional buildings, with anything else that's there. So there's no change in their rights before the plan or after their plan. It's just now they get to see, oh, this is what this area is going to be looking like. And there's potential interest because there's people who are willing possibly buy your land.
Are they going to undo the parking lot that's
Maybe.
across from the 7? But wasn't that donated to the city years ago because it was like this horrible buildings there at the corner?
Pizzeria was there.
And then it was dedicated to a park?
No,
And then the
it's,
city decided to undo it and then make a parking lot out of it?
well, if that's what it is now, it is a
Yeah,
parking
that was
lot.
like-
Parking lot was
Because
put
like
in
I say,
after
I've lived here
Luigi's
forever.
was taken down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, I mean, that park, clearly there's no park there right now.
No.
History
That
beyond
was so
all of
many
us here,
years
so
ago.
I can't comment on
But
that.
one thing is that we are looking at, for the redevelopment area as a whole, one of the things the community has said they want and that we would like to see is open space. So, you know, that is one thing we'll be looking at as part of any proposal that, you know, that we get.
And the other thing, just to, on your point, obviously before this process was undertaken, one of the things that our planner did do is go through a title search and of the city-owned parcels. So it's not as if we decided to undergo this process without knowing that we had clear title to do this stuff.
So if there was a park there, it was not protected by anything.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there was a purpose on whoever left it. There was a purpose.
They may not have memorialized it in a document, and that's,
Oh.
Well, that's before our time, so I can't,
Yeah,
we're not going to go
many
venturing
years
into
ago.
comment on before, much before our time. John?
I was just wondering, why do we have to redevelop Broad Street?
Yeah.
I like it the way it is.
Yeah, it's a good
Why-
question.
why fix it?
Yeah, why fix it? Why?
It's not broke.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I'll explain to you what
It's somebody said, hey, we got nothing to do, let's fix Broad Street.
No, it's not for that reason. So, first of all, I mean, this has been going on when I joined council 2 years ago, so this has been going on, you know, before this council was formed. Prior councils were in favor of it, all unanimously on the planning board, everybody favored it for 2 years on it. So why is everybody thinking this way? Why do we need to do this when we have, you know, those parcels comprises, as the mayor said, about 10 acres. They pay a total of $200,000 in property taxes, out of which the city gets $40,000 in property taxes. Okay. This is real estate that is sitting next to a train station, next to a park, that is next to, is on a bus line.
next to our downtown.
Next to our downtown. One of the biggest concerns that people will talk about is property taxes and say, my property taxes are too high. What are you going to do to cut my property taxes? The most long-term and sensible way control property taxes is through increase in rateables.
No.
81% of the taxes in this town are paid by residences. 19% is paid by commercial entities, retail entities, and businesses. Right? The only way to reduce people's property taxes in a long-term, thoughtful manner that can be done is to make sure that that base, that rateable base, especially if this idea has a commercial component on it, first floor commercial or businesses, and we may even have a combination. We may have certain parcels that may more be suitable for Class A office space. We may not even have as much residences, or we may have mostly residents. We will have to see how all these conceptual plans work out. There's a great deal of demand. One of the things we created as council this year is an economic development committee to look at the long-term projections of where the town is headed and how it is headed vis-a-vis our region, as well as the economy. Just the local economy, the national economy. Where are we positioning ourselves? Most corporate entities will tell you have long-term planning. We as a city never did. It's not to command and control, to make sure that government controls what businesses do. Instead, it is thoughtful planning. That's what city government should be doing. And one of the things is, when we talk within the Economic Development Committee, people having talked to us, or people who are volunteers, other residents, just like ourselves, there, Class A office space is in a great deal of demand here in this town. We're right next to, as I said, the train station. We have a very educated population. We have a high income, worth generally population in town. And so Class A office space is very valuable. But our downtown is not only historic, but there's also just that there's the fracturization of different, you can't build that big structures, right? So 4 floors or 3 floors just automatically somewhere in Springfield Avenue or Beechwood. This gives us an opportunity potentially to bring in some Class A office space, which brings us possibly, we've gotten McKinsey to come into our towns, the Boston Consulting Group to come into our town. Those are really good tenants to have. And also, a lot of their workers come in without having to use cars. They come in because they live in the city, or Hoboken or Jersey City, they take the mass transit into, and they have disposable income to spend in Summit before they leave. That's the kind of stuff, long-term projection thinking.
It's to improve the tax base, so that we don't have to increase taxes on our residents.
And we don't have to cut services.
Like the Chinese say, the long march.
Yeah.
Because they think 100 years ahead.
That's right. And that is exactly what we should do. How we should think is not just for the next year, next 2 years, but where are we positioning ourselves going forward? And any thoughtful planning requires you to do that. And I think a combination of having an economic development committee along with having this redevelopment happening at the same time. I am extremely impressed, I will say, after serving. I started serving on some city board or the other since I moved here to this town in 2003, and I've been serving on some city board or the other since 2005. And I will tell you that the quality of people who apply for volunteer positions in this town and who give up their time and who have backgrounds that are so necessary. When we do this redevelopment work, let me tell you, there's a bunch of people sitting around with us. Forget our own professional staff. We have a bunch of people, both on the planning board, council, and other places, who have so much in-depth knowledge about the industry and what's going on. It is really impressive.
Yes. Question. Can you please tell me what the plan is for the Celgene property at the opposite end of Morris Avenue, the Marco Polo area, if you would? I've noticed there's a lot of that. I heard while I was grabbing a coffee one morning that some of those buildings were coming down. And I was wondering what Celgene's plans were for the rest of that property.
Nor do you have a, I mean, I have a...
Yeah, they are planning to take down some buildings, but frankly, they don't have long-term plans about what they want to do there. They put a lot of time and money into finishing inside one of the existing buildings for the CAR-T technology, which is this amazing technology where it's to treat a form of cancer, and they're working with a couple of different hospitals, John Theuer being one of them. And you take the blood from a cancer patient. It is taken from the hospital to this incredibly pristine, unbelievably clean lab, multiple steps. They do something, I don't know what, they do something to the blood, then they take it back, and it's reinserted into the patient, and it is having incredible results.
That's great.
It's one of these amazing things. So they've worked a lot on that in the last 2 years. They want to take down some of these buildings because they don't want to pay taxes on them because they're obsolete and they're not using them.
That's what I was wondering, because I know they have ratables on that building.
That's right. And they bought that building for $90 million and was on the books for
350.
350. And so the city, they requested a tax assessment, a tax reduction. We did all the research with other comparable campuses like that in northern Jersey, and the 90 million was not a bad number. Because these campuses are not as valuable at all as they used to be.
Exactly.
So we did have to allow them a significant tax reduction, but they, as good neighbors, are not taking it in 1 year, which was their right. It's stepped down over 5 years.
I just wondered if they had planned to sell off part of those parcels.
I don't think they have any plans to sell it at this point.
They've kind of talked in general terms about, at some point, presenting the state of the
Right.
plan with some expansion in that campus, but they haven't come forward to, they've just talked in very general terms that
Right.
Yeah.
maybe they'll be presenting something to council.
And
about
they have to
expansion,
provide
but
a big plan.
They go to
there's
the
nothing
planning
definite.
board.
There's nothing, it would have to go through the same
Oh, yeah.
process. Go to the
They're-
planning board, go
it's
through the whole
vibrant
process,
down
get
there.
approved by council, all those things. So that hasn't happened yet.
And-
So
and
we've
in
kind of heard
Frankfurt-
in these general
Yeah.
terms, but nothing specific.
I mean, frankly, it would be good because it would
Yeah.
increase the rateables on that
On
property.
that property and
That's what I was
more
wondering, yeah.
employees and more, bringing more people in town. They're great, they're great partners and neighbors
Yeah.
to our town. So, but there's nothing that's been presented to us yet.
Go ahead.
As in the news recently, New Jersey Transit has cut service yet again on our line between October and December. Luckily, it's not going into the city, it's just the Hoboken line, certain
Right.
trains got canceled. Is the town in discussions with New Jersey Transit about how we're being affected by this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Nora's
Okay.
Yeah.
really on top of
Yeah.
it.
We're on-
I'll say Nora's
I can tell you the phone numbers.
Nora can recite all the phone numbers.
And I'll tell you because she can't toot her own horn, but she's been one of the more proactive mayors in being very, very proactive and very communicating with New Jersey Transit constantly, really pushing Summit's agenda and saying how important we are to New Jersey Transit and that they need to be respectful back. And so I think Nora's been one of the more proactive mayors, and we're lucky to have Nora on our side.
Yeah, you know the reason why they're doing it, because it's that
Positive
positive
train control.
Correct, yeah.
control,
Right.
because after
Which they
that
have to
horrible
do.
accident in Hoboken.
Right, and they're going to, it should have been done much more quickly the last couple of years, but it wasn't, so here we are. And it has to get done by December 31st, which is why they took these trains out of service. I really was very aggressive with them last summer,
Yeah.
and it ended up not being quite as bad for our commuters because the Jersey Transit did bring in buses, right? And that made it, but that was because we were jumping up and down, and they now, it came out in the paper last week, I forget which day it was, about the trains being, cut from the Hoboken line. And they called me, I got this guy, Paul Wyckoff is my current liaison. He called me the day before, and he said, just want to let you know, I know you don't like surprises, I know you don't like reading the stuff in the paper, but we're working on the press release, it's going to go out. These are the trains it's going to affect. Just wanted to let you know, and you'll see it tomorrow. But, so Amtrak had to do all that work last summer.
Yes.
And this summer, Amtrak did a lot of work, but it was on the east end of the Amtrak Penn Station, so it affected the Long Island Railroad trains. Unfortunately, it's coming back our way next summer, but they have promised that it will be dispersed among many lines, and not just the Morrison Essex.
Right.
But again, having those buses did make a difference, at least, but
Oh, and I took the buses in the morning, so
Right.
it was easy enough and it was fine.
right. It ended up being better than we thought it was going to be.
Yes.
But I have to say, everybody's more than happy to bash them, but in terms of their communication with us, they've been very, very good. After that first kerfluffle, when all of a sudden we knew it was, we just had no notice and suddenly we're losing half our trains.
Yeah.
Since then, they realized, and the new administration has been, at New Jersey Transit, they've been much more, responsive. So, it's a tough one, but you know what? These trains are falling apart, we gotta fix them.
Yeah,
Well, so is the
it's
tunnel. I mean,
important.
that's the
Well,
other
that's another whole.
That's the part that I'm worried about, is the tunnel's
Yeah.
going to go
Yeah,
next.
that's a much bigger issue.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? I don't want to hold people to the evening now.
Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you very much
Thank you
for
very
the
much.
last council on the road,
When's the
and
next discussion about this parkline thing?
It's
we
not
will-
scheduled yet.
It's not scheduled yet, and when we schedule it, we put it on.
You'll know. Is everybody here signed up for notifications on the city website? That is by far the best way to get information. So if you go to the city website, cityofsummit.org, and on the bottom, all this little thing says, one of the buttons says notifications. You hit that, and up pops a long list of things that you can get notifications about. Council meetings, All the meetings, Environmental Commission, Planning Board, Zoning Board, the dates of all them,
Weather,
bidding,
power outages.
power outages, severe
Trash
weather,
and recycling.
severe weather
Recycling.
alerts, trash and recycling, and you can just put your email address in there, and you just click off the things that you want information about. And community news is one that I would recommend, because that's about any events, stuff that's happening in the community. And then you get a notification about what's happening in the areas that are of interest to you. And by far the best way to get information. It's not incumbent upon you to check the website on a daily or weekly basis to see what's happening. The information just comes to you directly. And I would highly recommend it. cityofsummit.org, notifications.
And with that, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.